Have you ever noticed this about yourself? You don't reply right away. You feel relieved when plans get canceled. You choose to be alone, not because you're sad, but because it feels right. If so, people probably assume the same thing about you, that you're lonely, withdrawn, or socially broken. But what if that's not true? In a world that never stops talking, choosing a solitary life is seen as suspicious. Society equates visibility with health, responsiveness with value, and constant connection with happiness. So when you step back, people don't ask why. You get labeled. Here's what they don't see. For many people, solitude isn't withdrawal. It's regulation. Your nervous system reaches its limit faster. Too much noise fragments your attention. Too much interaction drains rather than nourishes. Being alone isn't depressing. It's stabilizing. It's where your body settles and your thoughts finally come back into focus. But silence makes others uncomfortable. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't perform belonging. So it gets pathologized. That's why most advice misses the point. They tell you to socialize more, push yourself, stay visible. But that doesn't work because the issue was never a lack of people. It was overload. In Tisby, though, we're going to explore the psychology of people who choose solitude, why some nervous systems are wired for quiet, how solitude differs from isolation, and why preferring to be alone is often a sign of self-awareness, not failure. Before we decide that people who choose solitude are broken, let's ask a better question. What if they're not withdrawing from life, but choosing the only way of living that allows them to stay whole? We often talk about being alone as if it's a single experience, as if there's only one emotional state that comes with it. But psychologically, there are two very different realities hiding behind the same word. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. They don't even live in the same part of the nervous system. Loneliness is a deficit state. It's what happens when your need for connection goes unmet. There's a reaching quality to it, a quiet hunger. You can feel lonely in a crowded room, in a relationship, even while being constantly surrounded by people. Loneliness isn't about physical isolation. It's about emotional absence, and it's exhausting because your system is always searching for something it can't find. Solitude is the opposite. Solitude is not something that happens to you. It's something you enter. When you choose solitude, you're not lacking connection. You're resting from it. Your nervous system isn't scanning for validation or reassurance. It's settling, breathing, reorganizing. In solitude, you're not waiting to be seen. You're allowing yourself to exist without being evaluated. This is why psychologists use the term aloneliness. It describes the frustration or irritation that arises when someone who needs time alone doesn't get enough of it. For these individuals, constant interaction doesn't feel nourishing. It feels depleting. And without solitude, they don't just feel tired. They feel scattered, unclear, slightly dissolved. This is where language matters. Loneliness feels heavy because it pulls you outward. Solitude feels grounding because it brings you back inward. One drains your energy by reminding you of what's missing. The other restores you by reminding you of what's already there. So when someone says they enjoy being alone, they're not saying they don't value people. They're saying they've learned something important, that their relationship with themselves is not a placeholder. It's a foundation. And that difference changes everything. When people talk about being too quiet or too sensitive to social environments, it's often framed as a personality flaw, as if something needs to be fixed. More confidence, more exposure, more a practicer. But what if the issue isn't personality at all? What if it's physiology? For many people who prefer solitude, the experience of social interaction isn't emotionally painful. It's neurologically expensive. Their nervous systems process stimulation more intensely. Conversations require more cognitive bandwidth, background noise, shifting social cues, and constant emotional monitoring all add up faster than they do for others. This is why some people leave a party feeling energized, while others leave feeling strangely hollow. Not sad, not offended, just depleted. There's a term many recognize once they hear it: social hangover. That foggy, overexposed feeling after too much interaction, difficulty focusing, irritability, a desire for silence that feels almost physical. This isn't avoidance. It's recovery. Highly sensitive nervous systems reach their saturation point sooner. Once that threshold is crossed, the body shifts from engagement into self-protection. Attention narrows. Muscles tense. The mind starts pulling inward. Not because it dislikes people, but because it needs to stabilize. And here's the crucial part. Most narratives miss. Needing less stimulation does not mean you need less connection. It means your system requires connection in different doses, at different rhythms, shorter interactions, deeper conversations, longer recovery periods. Quiet time isn't an escape from life. It's the maintenance that allows you to return to it intact. So, before labeling yourself as broken, antisocial, or defective, consider this. You may not be withdrawing because something is wrong with you. You may be listening to a nervous system that knows exactly what it needs. There's a popular idea in psychology that helps explain why solitude feels nourishing for some people and draining for others. It's called the Savannah theory of happiness. In simple terms, it suggests that our brains still carry preferences shaped by early human environments. Small groups, predictable rhythms, familiar faces. For most people, frequent social interaction aligns with that ancient wiring. More connection equals more satisfaction. But here's where it gets interesting. Researchers found a consistent exception. Individuals with higher cognitive complexity often report lower life satisfaction when they socialize more frequently. Not because they dislike people, but because their attention is pulled elsewhere, toward ideas, toward long-term goals, toward abstract problems that require uninterrupted focus. Depth changes the equation. When your mind is constantly running simulations, questioning assumptions, or building internal models of the world, casual interaction can feel like friction. Not wrong, just misaligned. Socializing becomes pleasant, but costly. It consumes mental bandwidth needed for thinking, creating, or integrating experience. This is why so many historically deep thinkers protected their solitude fiercely. Not out of arrogance, out of necessity. But here's the reality check that matters. Preferring solitude does not automatically mean you're more intelligent. And intelligence itself isn't a moral badge. It shows up in many forms. Emotional, relational, practical, not just analytical depth. Likewise, many highly intelligent people thrive socially and draw energy from others. So, this isn't about superiority. It's about alignment. Some minds process the world outwardly through constant exchange. Others process inwardly through synthesis and reflection. Neither is better. But confusing one for the other creates unnecessary shame. If socializing leaves you depleted, it doesn't mean you're defective or exceptional. It may simply mean your mind prioritizes depth over frequency, meaning over motion, integration over stimulation. And once you understand that difference, the pressure to perform connection the right way begins to loosen. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking a better question. What environment allows my mind to function best? At some point, the word introvert stops being enough. It explains where your energy goes, but not how you move through the world. It doesn't capture the deeper pattern behind people who are comfortable standing slightly apart. Not out of shyness, but out of self-direction. Psychologically, these individuals score high in a trait called autonomy. Autonomy isn't independence in the rugged, antisocial sense. It's the ability to regulate yourself from the inside. Your values aren't borrowed from the room you're in. Your sense of worth doesn't rise or fall with approval. When faced with a decision, you look inward before you look around. This changes everything. While most people unconsciously scan social environments for cues, how should I act? What's acceptable here? Self-guided individuals rely on an internal compass. They don't need to perform alignment. They already know where they stand. From the outside, this can look like detachment or arrogance or emotional distance, but internally, something very different is happening. There's a quiet steadiness, less urgency to be understood, less fear of being misread. This is also why external validation feels strangely unsatisfying to them. Praise doesn't land the way it does for others. Criticism doesn't devastate them either. Their nervous system isn't calibrated to constant feedback. Autonomy reduces noise. It allows space for long-term thinking, ethical consistency, and And because these people don't rely on social mirroring to feel real, they can tolerate being alone without collapsing into self-doubt. They're not withdrawing from others. They're anchored in themselves. And once you understand autonomy, not as a personality label, but as a psychological orientation, you stop confusing quiet self-direction with emotional absence. For many people, small talk is harmless. It's a social warm-up, a way to signal friendliness without asking much of anyone. But for those wired for depth, it can feel strangely exhausting. Not because it's awkward, but because it's empty of meaning. Surface-level conversations demand a kind of performance, smiling at the right moments, reacting with just enough interest, tracking cues that don't actually matter. Your mind is busy, but not engaged. You're present, yet internally drifting. Over time, this creates a quiet fatigue that's hard to explain to people who enjoy social ease. This is why silence often feels preferable. It's not that depth-oriented people dislike conversation. They dislike friction without substance. They're drawn to exchanges that move somewhere. Questions that open rather than fill space. Conversations about ideas, inner worlds, contradictions, and truth. When that depth isn't available, remaining silent feels more honest than pretending interest. There's also the cost of masking. In small talk, many people unconsciously wear a social version of themselves. Lighter, simpler, less complex. For someone whose inner world runs deep, that mask can feel like a slow eraser. Not dramatic, just draining. So, choosing silence isn't rejection. It's self-preservation. It's the decision to save energy for moments that matter, for conversations that nourish instead of deplete. And once you recognize that hunger for depth, you stop mistaking selective engagement for social failure. It was never about being antisocial. It was about being sincere. When solitude is chosen, not forced, it becomes more than rest. It becomes an incubator. In quiet, something subtle but essential happens. Your attention stops fragmenting. The constant task of monitoring others fades. There's no one to impress, no rhythm to match, no emotional weather to track. And in that absence of demand, the mind finally has room to organize itself. This is why solitude is so often linked to creativity and insight. Without interruption, thoughts are allowed to unfold fully. Ideas connect across time instead of being cut short. Emotions that were postponed in conversation can surface, be felt, and then integrated. Solitude gives the psyche a chance to metabolize experience rather than constantly react to it. Neurologically, this inward state activates a different system of reward. Instead of the high arousal stimulation that comes from novelty and social feedback, the brain releases chemicals associated with focus, calm engagement, and sustained attention. This is the foundation of the flow state. That immersive feeling where time softens and effort feels almost invisible. But it's important to be clear about one thing. Solitude doesn't create brilliance on its own. It creates conditions. Conditions where curiosity can deepen, where half-formed ideas aren't rushed into performance, where self-expression doesn't need an audience to be real. For some people, this is where their most honest work is born. Not because they're isolated from the world, but because they're finally listening to themselves. Solitude, at its best, isn't an escape from life. It's where life is quietly assembled piece by piece before being carried back out into the world with clarity and intention. Solitude can be a sanctuary, but it can also become armor, and the difference between the two is subtle. Healthy solitude is chosen. It restores you. It sharpens your sense of self and sends you back into the world, more grounded than before. But there's a moment when solitude stops being about nourishment and starts being about protection, not from noise, but from risk. This is where the trap begins. When being alone is no longer about peace, but about avoiding disappointment. When silence isn't restful, but rigid. When the thought of connection doesn't feel neutral or curious, but threatening. At that point, solitude has quietly turned into a defensive structure. Often, this shift isn't conscious. It forms after being misunderstood too many times, after having your words twisted, your depth dismissed, or your boundaries crossed. Withdrawal starts to feel safer than engagement. And over time, the nervous system learns a dangerous lesson. Distance equals safety. This is not solitude, tease, is hiding. The warning signs aren't dramatic. They're quiet. A growing bitterness toward people. A shrinking emotional range. Neglecting basic care. Losing interest in being known at all. When isolation hardens instead of softens you, it's no longer serving its original purpose. Even the most self-directed people need contact. Not constant connection, but real connection. A few trusted relationships where you don't have to perform or explain your wiring. The healthiest solitary individuals aren't those who avoid the world entirely. They're the ones who can walk into it when needed and leave without resentment. Solitude should be a place you visit, not a place you disappear into. And recognizing the difference is an act of self-respect, not weakness. Healthy solitude isn't about cutting yourself off from the world. It's about choosing how and when you engage with it. For people who thrive in quiet, the goal isn't isolation. It's balance. A rhythm that honors the need for depth without sacrificing human connection entirely. This often means fewer relationships, but stronger ones. Less frequency, more intention. At its healthiest, solitude works in cycles. You step back to restore your nervous system. You reflect, think, create, and recalibrate. Then, when your energy returns, you step forward again, not to perform, but to participate, to connect in ways that feel aligned rather than obligatory. This is where the idea of a small, safe circle matters. Most depth-oriented people don't need many connections. They need a few that are honest and emotionally regulated. Relationships where silence isn't misread, and space doesn't trigger abandonment fears, where you can disappear for a while and return without explanation or punishment. Healthy solitude also requires one uncomfortable skill. Noticing when withdrawal has gone too far, if you feel increasingly numb instead of calm. If connection feels not neutral but impossible, if solitude no longer restores you, it's time to gently reopen the door. Not to everyone, just to what's safe. The strongest form of solitude doesn't reject humanity. It refines your relationship to it. You're not hiding from the world. You're learning how to enter it without losing yourself. And when solitude is practiced this way, it doesn't make you smaller. It gives you something rare, the ability to be alone and connected without betraying either. There is a quiet kind of strength that rarely gets celebrated. Not the strength of being seen, not the strength of being admired, but the strength of being at ease in your own presence. When you're comfortable alone, something fundamental shifts. You stop chasing noise to feel real. You stop measuring your worth by how quickly others respond, approve, or include you. Your sense of stability no longer lives outside of you. It lives within. This doesn't make you superior. It makes you self. Being at peace with solitude means you can choose connection, not cling to it. You can walk into relationships without needing them to complete you, fix you, or rescue you from yourself. And because of that, your connections become cleaner, calmer, and more honest. In a world that constantly demands attention, choosing quiet is a form of freedom. It's a refusal to let your nervous system be hijacked by endless stimulation. A decision to move at a rhythm that actually belongs to you. If this video put words to something you felt but never quite explained, you're not alone here. This channel is a space for people who experience the world deeply, quietly, and thoughtfully.